old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me on the council, as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Gentlemen, welcome to 2024 as we embark yet again to a galaxy far, far away, long, long ago. Welcome, welcome.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year indeed. We have explored the far, far away galaxy of Ahsoka, the far, far away galaxy of the show we just watched. What the hell was it called?
Andor. Mothma.
Andor. Talking about the year of the brain fart. Okay.
Luther.
The Force is not with me. Well, going forward, we are looking into the post-Empire world of The Mandalorian, one of the most critically acclaimed Disney Plus offerings. Certainly a return to the Star Wars universe that I think was universally welcomed by Star Wars fans after the post-trilogy fallout, shall we say. So, with any new show we endeavor upon, we dive deep into the lore and history of the making of, courtesy of our very own Jedi Master, Psyllium Maas. Tell us about the making of The Mandalorian.
Thank you, Jedi Master, Urza Master. Thank you, Jedi Master, Lord Uther. And again, Happy New Year and Happy 2024 to all of our Graying Jedi and pending rebrand fans worldwide. We look forward to another exciting year together with so much surprise and adventure and excitement around every broadcast. Even we aren't quite sure what comes next, but you will delight in discovering it along with us. And yes, as we take a little trip backwards in the Star Wars release schedule, we turn it all the way back to 2019, the before time. Literally just 2 or 3 months before a global pandemic would grip planet Earth and send everything tumbling from its axis, there was the launch of the Great Streaming Wars. Not quite as violent as the Clone Wars, but November of 2019 was when suddenly, to challenge the evil empire that is Netflix, we suddenly had a wide variety of channels, streaming opportunities to see new content and existing library content all under one roof. Disney Plus, Apple Plus, Amazon Prime Video, Paramount Plus, Peacock, whatever's been on my monthly bill. They all started to launch right around this time. So we have to go even further back to the humble beginnings of The Mandalorian. The first live-action series of the Star Wars franchise is The Mandalorian, and it is set 5 years after Return of the Jedi, or 9 years after the Battle of Yavin in Episode 4, A New Hope, if you want to keep your timeline straight. But George Lucas was developing his own live-action show as far back as 2009, well before, 10 years before Mandalorian made it to your streaming services. And this would have been 4 years after Revenge of the Sith was in theaters, and 1 year into the animated Clone Wars series that was airing on TNT, which was being run, spearheaded, supervised by none other than Dave Filoni, who would later go on to, of course, shepherd the Ahsoka series and write every episode, and which we've discussed previously on The Graying Jedi, which, again, if you click that subscribe button and check out our archives, you can hear how we dealt with the latest in the Star Wars franchise. George Lucas's show had nothing to do with Mandalorians, or if it did, it wasn't the focus. He was concentrating more on the vast underworld of Coruscant, which Star Wars fans know. It looks all cosmopolitan and Tony on the surface, but there are literally thousands of levels beneath the surface. In fact, we glimpsed some of them in Andor when Luthen and Lonnie took an elevator ride. There are lots of denizens, lots of shady characters, bounty hunters, scum and villainry that he was hoping to explore. The problem was in 2009, despite the global success of Star Wars, it was deemed too expensive to produce at that time. And if you think about it, that's only 10 or 15 years ago we're talking about. But the cost of mounting an effective live-action Star Wars series with state-of-the-art effects provided by ILM and everything that fans would have flocked to just could not be, they couldn't realize the scale and economics of it back then. So it was always on the drawing board, but had never made it into reality. Once Disney Plus was announced as a new content stream and strategy for the Mouse House, this was after Lucasfilm was sold to Disney in 2012. The first product from that relationship came out in 2015. You had books, you had comic books, and you had, of course, The Force Awakens. It was after they realized, we've got a cash cow here, folks, that the live-action Star Wars, or a cash bantha, the live-action Star Wars was placed in the back to tank and resurrected, albeit anything goes. They threw out any existing ideas that Lucas may have been developing. I mean, he had scripts written, he had pre-production sketches. They were fairly far along for what they could do without actually committing it to film or digital video. But they just said, here's the blank whiteboard, what are we doing? So they announced that they would do a live-action Star Wars series, the first of many, in November of 2017, and they timed that announcement with the release of the second big screen film for under Disney, The Last Jedi, of the sequel trilogy. So those two announcements dovetail. Jon Favreau, he came on board about 3 or 4 months later in March of 2018, and he would become a writer, producer, and showrunner for The Mandalorian. Now, we knew Jon Favreau, coming up in the neighborhood as an actor. In fact, one of his very first screen roles was with his buddy Sean Astin in the classic Notre Dame football underdog story. Pardon me, we're getting a scrambled transmission from the outer reaches there. Just we'll wait for ComScan to clean that up. Yes, so he makes his debut in Rudy, and then we start seeing him hanging out with Vince Vaughn in Swingers. He was in a terrific, underrated Gene Hackman, Keanu Reeves football comedy, The Replacements. He was in The Daredevil that starred Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner, the one that they try to pretend they didn't actually make. He was in The Breakup, again with Vince Vaughn. His big break came, though, when he joined the MCU as both an actor and a creative. He directed Iron Man, the original, 2008, and took a chance on Robert Downey to be the star, and it paid off handsomely. And he directed the less impressive Iron Man 2, which is still a fine picture, but is a little scattershot in the script department, if you're judging said things. And then he appeared as Happy Hogan, a supporting character in Iron Man's 1, 2, and 3, the Avengers saga, including the Avengers Age of Ultron, Infinity War, Endgame. And then he followed that up with 3 of the Tom Holland Spider-Mans, Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. So you've seen him on screen. He's usually plays the sad shack guy who never gets the girl, or might get the girl, but ultimately provides some great comic timing and so forth. A real salt of the earth fellow. But at the same time he was collecting a paycheck from Marvel, he was expanding his chops as a director. He made his debut with Elf, with Will Ferrell, which we covered in our pending rebrand Cinebits. Again, delightful time to subscribe and check out our little 30-second film schools for you, where we tell you the story of the movie implausibly in just under a minute, so you'll want to check those out. It's all the Hollywood we could cram into 30 seconds. But he directed Elf, he directed Zathura, which is not as well regarded, sort of a space-age take on Jumanji, but it's got its moments. Cowboys and Aliens, which still wins Best Title of 2011, and features Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford in a Western that is exactly what the title suggests, Cowboys versus Aliens. He did a wonderful picture, Chef, where he was a top-of-the-line cuisine artist who battles with a food critic and then decides to chuck it all and open a food truck. And if you haven't seen that one, Favreau,
Wonderful.
that's a delightful, underrated little picture from 2014.
Is that with Bradley Cooper?
I don't remember if he was in or not. I know Robert Downey Jr.
I might think
was
it's.
there. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to
no.
sidetrack you and check my microphone. So
Bradley Cooper, I mean, he's good in anything, right? But what got him on the map at Lucasfilm was his work for Disney, with 2 adaptations of their animated pictures in live action, and I use that term loosely, live action with photorealistic CGI. He adapted The Jungle Book, which was a huge success, and then went on to do The Lion King. And in both cases, he, along with Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's special effects company, they basically created the stagecraft, aka the volume, and it was that work for the features that then led to him sort of getting the door open to go in and pitch to Lucasfilm, which we'll do in a moment. But basically, the stagecraft is a virtual set with a 360-degree video wall. And so that's what helps keep budgets down that George Lucas wasn't able to do in 2009, because now you can recreate outer space, planetary environments right there, digitally, allowing the actors to concentrate. They're not acting in front of a green screen anymore, or they're physically sort of in the desert or on a water planet or in a cockpit of a spaceship. And now you can focus on performance and practical effects being done in front of these screens. And like I say, it was a technology that was first developed for video games, and Favreau, kind of taught himself and worked with the engineers and so forth, and kind of became an expert at it, and then started blowing people away when they were demonstrating this technology. Like James Cameron was like, "I bet you I can see where the seams are," and he couldn't. And Guillermo del Toro and all of these pioneering 21st century visual artists were just blown away by what this stagecraft technology, what doors it could open. So suddenly a show that might be deemed prohibitively expensive just 10 years earlier, now you can do it on a budget that's still high, but at least something that you makes more sense on your return of investment. And then, so we've talked about Favreau as an actor and as a director, but he also had direct ties to Star Wars. In the Clone Wars animated series, he had a recurring role as a Mandalorian leader of Death Watch, pre-Vizsla. He appeared in several episodes. And if you enjoyed Solo, a Star Wars story, like I did, he was one of Beckett's crew members trying to rob the train, the 6-armed Rio Durant sitting around the campfire cracking wise. That was Favreau's voiceover too. So the man literally was kind of destined, fated, chosen, the chosen one to helm the Mandalorian when it was finally ready to get off the ground there. And what he did, he had an idea. He was inspired by a Japanese manga called Lone Wolf and Cub, and he envisioned this sort of samurai western set post Return of the Jedi, after the Empire has fallen and the New Republic is struggling to get on its feet and, you know, maintain peace and order throughout the galaxy. He saw that as a lawless environment in which the sequel trilogy that Disney was undergoing was set, you know, 30 years after Return of the Jedi. There was a lot of ground to cover in between. And so they felt this was the best place to kind of place this. And later shows, the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, have all taken place in this similar era. This is the new hip time to be, you know, in the run-up to Rey and Finn and Poe Dameron and Kylo Ren. This is where they've chosen to play in the sandbox right now for Lucasfilm. So he pitched it to him, and she said, "I like it." And I know that Dave Filoni, who up to this point had been primarily an animator, really wants to sort of branch out and try live action. So she ended up getting the two of them together, and they ended up becoming, you know, co-directors, co-writers, co-executive producers, co-creators, if you will, of The Mandalorian. Now, Favreau did something that is usually forbidden in Hollywood. Before he was even officially hired, of the 8 first season episodes that eventually were filmed, he had already written 4 of them before he even got the job. And in that case, he was able to demonstrate to Lucasfilm, look, I'm serious about this, how much I love this franchise, and here are the first 4 episodes. So you can get a sense exactly what I want to do with it if you give me the job. And it worked, because he did get the job. The title and the premise was announced on October 3rd of 2018, so that's another year now, from 1 year out from the announcement of the show, and about 8 months after Favreau was hired. And they kept the announcement pretty minimalist. They just said that it's going to be set after Return of the Jedi, and it's about a bounty hunter making his way through the galaxy and doing lawless. So people started getting all these crazy ideas. My God, it's going to be like The Empire Strikes Back every week. It's going to be this like tough as nails bounty hunter who's out there, you know, bringing in suspects and killing the bad guys, and you know this. But Favreau deliberately withheld some key information about where the show would be going, and in fact he credited Donald Glover, who would later play a young Lando Calrissian in Solo. Donald Glover, who was in The Lion King remake that Favreau was directing, they were sitting around waiting for a shot to get developed on the set of The Lion King, and Donald Glover said, you know, in a movie you have to put all the best stuff in the trailer so that they will show up on a Friday and go see your movie and make money. He goes, you can't surprise people anymore. People don't, there's a lack of genuine, like, I didn't see that coming, or I never expected it. You have to give away the secrets just to earn back, you know, like he was complaining about superhero trailers and movies where they show you the big explosions or the fight scenes, and if you're a savvy enough moviegoer, you can kind of piece together, you know, what comes next or before, et cetera, et cetera. And that sparked Favreau to make a huge decision with this show, which is not to reveal a key element, and we will discuss that key element here very shortly. He did not get to direct any of this first season because of the Lion King commitments, but he assembled a pretty good Magnificent Seven kind of team to help realize his vision. He wrote every episode, and I think, if my memory serves, he wrote every episode with no assistance. It was straight from him, just like Filoni wrote every episode of Ahsoka. So it came from a singular authorial point of view. But I mean, he hired Filoni to do his first live action work. Dave got to direct the pilot, which we're about to talk about in detail. They had Taika Waititi coming off of Ragnarok, which was a huge Marvel game changer in terms of how they approached that character and introducing comedy and absurdity and surrealism into it. Ron Howard's daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, who, quick aside, actually spent a couple of nights filming the movie Backdraft, sitting right next to my brother. And in fact, if you know what Dallas Howard looks like at 10 years old, and you pop in your copy of Backdraft for the retirement party scene, you will see a bespectacled young Alec Campbell, my brother, engaging with her at the table. No dialogue. He didn't get his SAG card, unfortunately. She probably already had one. But that's my Bryce Dallas Howard story. So she will be appearing in the upcoming Apple film Argyle. You may have seen the trailers. So she still does a little bit of acting, but she really wanted to direct. And so this gave her the opportunity to do that. Deborah Chow, who would later direct every episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi miniseries, which I'm sure we'll be covering in future Graying Jedi podcasts. So again, remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out when we cover Obi-Wan and Anakin and all the trouble they get into between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And Rick Famuyiwa, and I know I said that wrong, Rick, and I apologize because we both went to USC Film School, just not at the same time. You will remember him. He not only directs the second episode we're going to talk about this evening, he also directed the season finale of Ahsoka, The Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord. So Rick is a committed Star Wars creator as well. They assembled for their title character, Pedro Pascal, who made his mark in season 4 of Game of Thrones as Oberyn Martell. He was also Javier Pena in Netflix's Narcos. And you've seen him on the big screen in Kingsman, The Golden Circle, and The Equalizer 2, and so forth. Most recently, he has been headlining HBO's sterling video game adaptation, The Last of Us, of which there will be a second season in 2025. So Pedro Pascal was cast as the silent, for the most part, but no less lethal Mandalorian, whose name we won't reveal yet because they haven't told us in the show. Gina Carano, who had a 7-1 record as a mixed martial artist from 2006 to 2000. She was cast as the hard-drinking, hard-fighting ex-rebel trooper Cara Dune. So, and she will be. She's not in these first 2 episodes, but we will be seeing her in episodes to come. And then for the rest of the first season, we had Nick Nolte, we had Carl Weathers, we had Taika Waititi doing the voice work for IG-8 or IG-11. Yeah, it's IG-11. Emily Swallow as the armorer. Giancarlo Esposito will be making an appearance as the treacherous Moff Gideon. Omid Abdi as a sinister Dr. Pershing. And personally my favorite, I'll just say it right now, Werner Herzog in this first season.
Yes.
As the client. Werner Herzog, who is a legendary documentarian and feature film director who has done, go ahead and Google him, pending rebrand fans, great fan. He's done some crazy stuff. He has one of the most recognizable modern voices and deliveries. If you've heard it, you know exactly what I mean. He's genuinely authentic, and the fact that he agreed to appear in a science fiction franchise was exciting to hear when he was cast, and he absolutely delivers a standout performance without overshadowing anything that's going on. You're just like, I just want to hear him recite Imperial codes like all afternoon and hire bounty hunters, because he is just tremendous. So the one thing that they didn't tell us, any of us, about, and they left a lot of money that Christmas season, because remember this show premiered November 12th, 2019. They left a lot of marketing money and merchandising because they did not tell us that there would be a child appearing at all. And that was one of the biggest reveals probably in the past 15 years in a television show. It was primarily an animatronic puppet that has some visual effects augmentation, but for the most part it is a practical physical puppet that appears on the set. And they originally planned for it to be all CGI, and you saw what Lucas did with Yoda in the prequel trilogies and so forth, creating stepping away from the old Frank Oz puppeteered model and trying to go with the digital format. And in some cases, when we discuss the prequels, we'll discuss the pros and cons of that approach. And that was what they were originally planning here, but it was none other than Werner Herzog who fell in love with the puppet while they were shooting on set and basically called the filmmakers out and said, use this, trust it. You have this amazing empathy, and the viewers that watch this will fall in love with this child. Don't just turn it over to soulless digital effects. And he must have been, because they ended up, again, 85 to 90% of the child is right there in their arms or on the ground or in the cockpit or so forth. So kudos to him. And finally, Ludwig Göransson, who I believe also went to USC. I think I've got that right. So it's Fight on Trojans for the season 1 of The Mandalorians. But he had a very unenviable task of having to follow in John Williams' footsteps. Because don't forget, this is the first Star Wars live-action show. And when we think Star Wars, we think John Williams, obviously. But to his credit, he delivers an otherworldly sound. There is an anthemic main title theme that could fit nicely into the Williams canon without too many people saying, that doesn't sound like John Williams. It absolutely does. And then he plays a lot with, believe it or not, an old junior high musical instrument or elementary school instrument, the recorder, of all things. He fell in love with the recorder, and he played around with it using synthesizers and digital keyboards and the like to make it sound otherworldly. But a lot of that, the wood and that you hear, the woodwinds and so forth, that's just a simple recorder that's been modified to sound, like a samurai or a Western, feel. So Ludwig Göransson is your composer, and he's done a terrific, fabulous job through not just this episodes that we're going to talk about, but through the series as a whole. So with that, Jedi Council, I am in desperate need of a death stick. So while I run to the corner and smoke a few, I know it's bad for me, but and I should rethink some of my life choices. Let's take the direction, the discussion wherever we want to with this primary first episode, Chapter 1, The Mandalorian. What stood out for you guys? And I mean, do you remember when you first watched it, how it hit? In terms of, yeah, I'll check that out and see what it's like. I mean, were you overjoyed like children opening Christmas presents? Tell us what you guys thought.
Absolutely. This was, for the first time of any of the Star Wars shows that I've watched, I think. I want to say this is the first time I actually felt like I was watching Star Wars again for the first time. And I think it's because what I like that Favreau did when he wrote this is it's very much kind of based in those Kurosawa films and Western films that the original Star Wars was really grown out of. It was all born out of that same kind of style and aesthetic, and this kind of leans a little more heavily into the Western aspect, but it really felt like a lot of the effects are practical. A lot of them are, it feels, I don't know, it feels like A New Hope. It really does feel like I'm watching something Lucas would have made back in the day. And I like the restrained bounty hunter, lack of dialogue, stoic, main character. I love the surrounding characters who are kind of like forcing themselves into the situation. I think of the blue guy in the very beginning of the episode where he's just like trying to get a rise out of him or get him to talk or get him to do something. And he's like thinking about escape and then ends up getting frozen in carbonite. Like, all of that is just so wonderful. Like, it's and then Brian Posehn being in there. Like, you just see these little cameos and all these like great things. But it feels very like genuinely post-Empire Star Wars. Like, again, this is something I come back to a lot, is what is going on outside of, the fight on Endor, and what's going on, in the broader galaxy. And I think the nice thing that these sort of extra Skywalker shows, shall we say, show us is that there was quite a bit happening. Foundations of these future movies, were being built pretty much right away, which is normal and understandable given the massive scope of this empire. And I like that The Mandalorian starts to comment on like the other forces at work against the empire aside from the force itself. And that was something to me was very exciting. I think we were all enamored with Boba Fett growing up, right? So it was cool to just see some explanation about, where that armor came from, that iconic look, and the ship and all that stuff. Like, it just felt so surreal. And then to see an actual toilet, a space toilet in Star Wars.
The first.
That was
right?
exciting. Yeah, that was amazing. And then the dynamic of the characters and some of the, the fallout that you see that happens after the Empire. Carl Weathers being like this hub of bounty hunters, and they're sort of doing good and justice in the world, but some of them are sloppy and some of them don't care. And like, it's a dark underbelly, but it's also like there's some nobility there. And then, of course, there's the, sort of dusty, beaten down stormtroopers and the obvious, like, ex-Imperial. And I mean, I don't think we could say enough about Werner Herzog. Like, this guy should have won, like, a stack of awards for his performance in just this episode. First of all, I don't care who it is. If they're German and they're playing a villain, it's going to be great. Like, there is no other way to slice it. Like, and kudos to the Germans for being such great villains all the time. They're very self-aware folks, but just his accent, I don't know, the guy's got a look about him. And it's funny because, like, I'm looking at this now again after these years, and I've seen him on other things. I recently saw him on a Conan podcast, and great interview, by the way. But the guy's he's got this like very dry, acerbic wit, and he's very funny. But he's just so like, I don't know if you want to call it deadpan or just like he's very German. I mean, that's the only, like, in my head, I'm saying he's a Deutscher. Like, he's very German, and he just delivers stuff on this level where he's like, I'm not being goofy, I'm not Jim Carrey, but I'm being very funny. Or if I'm trying to be like sort of dark, shady, and evil, I don't have to be like, murderous and like dripping in blood to be evil. I can just be suggestively evil. Because you really don't even know at the point that he enters this first episode that he's a bad guy. Like, you kind of get that vibe. It's definitely set up that way. But it's still kind of like, is he or isn't he? Like, is he just looking for a bounty? Is he just kind of like, I mean, it feels there's some odd tension there. And I have to say, it's a very Werner Herzog moment, even. If you've watched any of his films, there's always this odd level of tension he gives, whether it's as far back as Agira or, I mean, even Jack Reacher has a little bit of this, So from top to bottom, this first episode, like, it gave me everything I wanted. It was that nostalgia factor. It was the weirdness of some of these alien characters, like the, I forget his name, but the I Have Spoken guy. Loved it. I mean, I didn't think I would at first. Loved it. The weird animals, which is always a Star Wars thing.
Blurgs.
Just everything. The droid. I mean, everything was just exciting and wonderful and did exactly, as a fan, that I wanted it to do.
Come in, Rogue One. Can you hear us, Rogue One? All right.
Rogue One.
While we adjust Rogue One's audio, I completely agree on what brought me the joy of this was it felt, and Favreau, I think, does this not just in these 2 episodes to start, but throughout the series. He tries to give us something that, as if you and Urza Master and Lord Uther and Psyllium Maas all sat down and said, you know what would be really cool? Let's write a Star Wars show and have something we've never seen before. And in this first episode, it was seeing an IG bounty droid like in action, because all we had previous to this, prior to this, comic book art aside, was a stationary droid in the background of The Empire Strikes Back while Boba Fett gets his marching orders from Lord Vader on the deck of the Star Destroyer Executor. And then an action figure, one of those second peg action figures when you couldn't get Han, Leia, or Darth Vader. Your parents brought you home IG-88 and said, here. And you're like, oh, that's amazing, that's great, I remember him. And then that's all. You had to use your imagination to even figure out, what does he sound like? How does he move? What is his, So I think in each episode, as we go through, we need to spot and call out those moments as fans, as young children, as old children, that were like, I've never seen that before in Star Wars. Because I think that's what Favreau did. He's like, I've never seen that droid actually, do its mission. And we certainly get that in a Sam Peckinpah shootout there. It's the Wild Bunch meets Star Wars there, where they're trapped in the village square and a mercenary 2-bit gun is taking shots at them. And that leads me kind of to the second point, is although it's a family-friendly show, and I mean that you literally can watch this with your family and not feel guilty that you're like showing them something. I don't know if you could say that about Andor. I'd like to believe you could. But here's one that you can put your 5-year-old there on the couch and watch it, and they may get scared by some of the monsters or so forth, but the violence is never beyond Star Wars violence. Like, it's never like graphic or anything of that nature, and you counterbalance that with the wholesomeness and things like that. I just felt, and if Lord Uther is with us, I just felt that we were watching something where somebody who truly was like, yeah, I want to get that Ring doorbell from Return of the Jedi back in there when the Mandalorian arrives to take the bounty on the child. I want to have a Life Day reference from the Star Wars Holiday Special in there. I want, carbonite. Like, I don't believe we ever see the carbonite used again in the Razor Crest, and I think it's because the Jawas in Episode 2 probably looted it. I'm going to get a cantina. I'm going to get a Gonk droid, the power droid, in there. It just felt like somebody who just, looked at their old action figures and looked at their old imagination, playthings that they did in the yard and the sandbox at the playground, and just crammed them all into this delightful, amazing series. But I'm ahead of myself. Jedi Master Lord Uther, can you hear me?
Hello?
There he is.
Welcome
Beautiful.
back.
All right. Anyway, where do I begin? Oh, we're seeing the mythos. Like, we're seeing it again, and I think that goes to whatever, both your points about just Star Wars, like a New Hope feeling. We didn't know enough about Boba Fett when in the original, whatever, in the first trilogy, and so to see this, it's really cool the way they're starting to build out the lore that kind of goes along with it. Like it's happening right in front of our eyes, whether it's the Beskar armor or just in terms of being a bounty hunter and what that entails. We're seeing it all happen, and I don't think that's something that's what caught me off guard, and that's what hooked me into it right away. Was this is something I haven't seen before, which is kind of like Andor. Like, we haven't seen that before, and I think that's what is reeling Star Wars fans in. And to your point about IG-88, when I saw this guy standing in the Executioner or whatever the name of Vader's ship was, I'm like, oh, it's a droid. Like, so what? Who knew that this guy could just mess up everybody walking right into a gunfight? I mean, that's something else that caught me off guard. Like, who knew this guy was so deadly? Had no clue. Zero. And the other thing that just got me hook, line, and sinker, it's and I don't remember seeing this on the internet. It might have been out there, maybe not. But to see, you know, the reveal of who the child is, it's probably one of the greatest Star Wars moments, right next to "I'm your father." It's got to be.
Yes.
Because the internet was on fire, as were a lot of different chats and text messages that were going around. Like, who is this child? Is it Yoda? I mean, we're all asking if it's Yoda's kid. Is it Yaddle's? You know, and people are like coming up with this whole theory of Yoda and Yaddle, and it's their kid, and all this other stuff. And is he still alive? Like, all those questions are starting with this episode. And I remember at one point, and I think I've said this before with another, like, to me, this saved Star Wars. This really rekindled that flame after the last two absolutely awful movies that were out there. I mean, putrid, awful Star Wars movies. And I'll keep speaking that evil all day long.
Why couldn't your microphone fail right there? That would have been the perfect place.
Because
for
it's not, because even my computer knows it's true. Like, my computer knows I tell no lies right now. So thank you, computer. Even though this microphone is awful, I need to get a new one. Last thing I want to say before we go into the second episode is perfect voice. Pedro Pascal's voice with a little bit of that, you know, microphone muffly is absolutely perfect. It just wrapped that whole character together with him speaking. I mean, and one last thing, even though I said the other thing was going to be the last thing, so too bad. The westernish music, anytime he, like the burr, 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 when he walks in, like the little horn or whatever that's playing, amazing. Like, perfect music for him to walk into a situation, like knowing he's there. And I do think he had a little bit of a gunslinger side to him, or attitude to him. I do think we see that, him kind of being this gunslinger. So, you know, I know Jedi Urza, Masters of Urza, that maybe you don't see it that much. I do see some of the Western to it when it comes to some of that stuff. Amazing. It's just the first episode and the second episode just lights out. Fantastic.
Some final thoughts on The Mandalorian Chapter 1. Iconic line, I can bring you in warm or I can bring you in cold, in that delivery.
Yes.
And think, again, Pedro Pascal, and I don't want to spoil anything for graying Jedi fans who may not have yet sampled the delicious wares of The Mandalorian yet, but certainly in these episodes, you only know it's him because his name's in the credits and you might recognize his voice from Game of Thrones. But he has to do all of this acting with either his body or his stunt double's body, depending on the scene, and his voice. That's all he's got to use. You can't read his eyes. You can't see his expression. Any emotion that comes through is basically 90%, you know, from the larynx. And they couldn't have to follow up Jedi Master Lord Uther's point, they couldn't have found somebody who understands the medium of, I have to communicate regret, sympathy, antagonism. Like, I have to do all of this where most actors have these tools to work with and I only have my voice. And yet you don't miss a beat. You know that he's like contemplating. You know when he's like, his ire is rising and you can't read anything. And there's whole sequences where he doesn't speak at all. And yet you still know what's going on behind that Beskar mask. So great job, as you say there. Also, I mean, he says it overtly, but it does frame the entire ethos of this particular timeline in Star Wars when the client, played by Werner Herzog, says, "It is good to restore the natural order of things after such a period of disarray. Don't you agree?" And that, you know, is the seed in which the First Order and, you know, the Empire finds itself resurrecting itself 30 years down the road. In the sequel trilogy there. So, and Nick Nolte was not on set as the Ugnaught, as Kuil, the Ugnaught who befriends the Mandalorian in these first two episodes. He only did the voice work, But boy, if you squint, that's kind of what Nick Nolte is looking like these days in real life. So as it turns out, like you're gonna, and my apologies to Nick Nolte because you were terrific in 48 Hours and another 48
Oh
hours.
my.
But he is no longer the Nick Nolte, the young sex symbol of the 70s and 80s. He is definitely getting up there in years and looks remarkably Ugnaughtish. But he was not actually on set. And that iconic final shot of this episode, cribbed from Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam from the Sistine Chapel, that's an image that will stay with me. That's an image that will stay with me forever. And did you guys have certainly noticed this, but it's worth calling out. I love their use of the concept art at the end of each episode as they're running the credits. Yeah. Because in many ways, I mean, if you're familiar with how Lucasfilm and ILM and all these guys did it, I mean, they will pre-visualize moments. But these are artists operating from their own imagination. And I love that the show, when you see the scenes that the artists sat at drafting tables and sketched and colored and made for, how remarkably similar, I mean, in some cases, they look identical to what ended up on camera. So credit to the film crews and the directors and the cinematographers for getting the look that the artists brought to them. But it's just, I mean, there's not that much separation when you really think about it. And even if there is, you'd get the essence of the scene, whether it's a battle scene or a landscape or whatever. So I love that thing that they do where they show you like, well, this is how we first dreamed it up. And then in your head, you're like, oh my gosh, that looks exactly like what I just saw. So, all right, so the next episode, now Disney Plus controversially also wanted to differentiate itself from Netflix and said, we're not going to give you everything at once. We're not going to give you 8 hours of cake and that you gorge yourself and said, oh, I'm so full, but it was good cake. No, they said, just like a traditional network TV model, we'll give you one slice of cake each week and leave you hungry and wanting for more. So the first episode of Mandalorian dropped, and that's all you had to gorge on for 7 whole days, or in my case, just rewatching it endlessly to pick up everything you missed. Chapter 2, The Child, aired on a week later, November 15th, 2019. And again, I apologize, Rick. Rick Famuyiwa was our director, and Jon Favreau, again, was our writer. And really, it just starts exactly where the first episode leaves off. And the other thing that was interesting in these first seasons, there wasn't like 50 plot threads you had to follow, like with, say, Andor, where you're like trying to keep track of Kleia and Luthen and Val and Mon Mothma. These are very linear, very straightforward sort of narratives. The Mandalorian and the Child are together. They navigate some obstacles. And then at the end of the episode, hopefully they're in a different place than they were than when they started. And this episode, we just talked about things I'd never seen in Star Wars before, but always dreamed I wanted to. We got a fight scene with the Trandoshans, whose most famous representative is the bounty hunter Bosk, also seen in the Empire Strikes Back scene. None of these characters he fights off in the canyon, reminiscent of the ambush by the Jawas in Episode 4 of poor R2-D2. None of the Trandoshans here are Bosk, but he does superficially resemble him. And then, of course, the big moment, the one that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni sat around and said, wouldn't it be great if? How about basically a car chase / Indiana Jones style battle on a sandcrawler going at top speed, where you're trying to fight your way in while the Jawas, who are, just generally considered not malicious or evil, but just greedy scavengers, try to fight you off and use every tool at their disposal, and some that aren't, to get you to vacate the premises. I mean, you just say to yourself, only a Star Wars fan could say, we're going to do this. We're going to do a 5-minute chase scene on a sandcrawler, and they're going to be disintegrating Jawas, and they're going to be, and they ultimately zap him with their droid immobilizers and so forth, and get him to clear out. But, I mean, and the fact that Jawas are, not just Tatooine natives, that they have other planets in the galaxy where they flourish and steal things. Just seeing the number they did on the iconic Razor Crest, which, by the way, the first time you see it in episode 1, you just instantly, it just feels like you've seen it the whole saga. Like it feels as iconic as the Millennium Falcon, a TIE fighter, an X-Wing. It has such a distinct look to it, a distinct shape and form. So you're already like, your heart breaks as you see the Jawas have completely just torn it to pieces, probably taken that carbonite freezer, because like I said, I don't think we ever saw that again. But, you know, so in terms of like advancing a narrative, where we had like with Ahsoka perhaps, or with Andor, where there was like lots of stuff going on, here it's not so much that there's a lot of plot going on, but your world building is happening, and we're sticking with some of the same characters that we just introduced you to an episode ago. And it's really more about the sensation, right? You know, we've got this exciting, you know, man versus vehicle chase, and then at the end we have a clash with a Mudhorn, who I believe is one of the creatures that Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan faced down in Attack of the Clones, albeit this one is much crankier. And so, like I say, there's not a lot to sort of like dive in for deeper meaning, but it's there. And there is a big reveal with the child, which I want you guys to talk about as well. But I mean, these 2 episodes are kind of really one seamless, it's why they call them chapters. It's not so much a standalone story segment, but rather just an interconnected thread of a larger tapestry. And it would be very easy to binge, you know, now that all episodes are available to you and so forth. But at the time, you're just agonizing, like, oh, I have to wait a week for the next one, which is what great network TV used to do for us. So all you younger generations, just know that we agonized for your benefit. We took one for the team, if you will. But what do you say, Team Jedi?
But I think that was I think that was the perfect play by Disney, because
Absolutely.
the hype was real. Like the discussions, everything that was out there, whether it was on the internets or chat groups or text messages, it was about this. And I mean, it was about the last episode and where do you think it's going to go. So, in a sense, I think Disney played that one perfectly, because it became water cooler discussion, right? I mean, I remember talking to my students about it. I remember, again, talking to you guys about it. So I think Disney played that one perfectly.
What's
Yes.
a water cooler?
Yes.
What's a water cooler?
Right. A Starbucks, which I don't drink.
Okay,
Even though
there
if they
you go.
want to endorse the show, they can anytime they want.
Oh, I drink Starbucks all the time. Please
Oh.
hit us up at Starbucks. Hit
Or
subscribe
Duncan.
too.
Duncan can back me, and Starbucks can back Urza.
I'll take
Urza-
Duncan, Caribou.
Anyone. Anytime you want to, fund
We love
the show,
coffee
feel
here.
free. Yeah, we're here for you. Anybody, I don't care. McDonald's coffee, whatever.
McDonald's coffee, yeah.
Yeah, well, hey. How about a sausage McMuffin with egg? That's always good, even though I'm trying not to eat that stuff anymore. Anyway, I also like that in the second episode, right away, we see Mando can fight. Like, right out of the box, he can take on things one-on-one. He's able to... and that was something from the first episode, too, because we saw that in the holiday special where Boba Fett had the gun, but it had, like, a little electricity at the end or wherever that was. Like, we're seeing that. We saw that used in the first episode, and then we see him utilizing that gun in this one. Disintegrating Jawas at some point. I mean, that caught me off guard a little bit, that he's just blowing these Jawas up out of nowhere, where I remember how traumatic it was for me when I was a kid with A New Hope to see C-3PO, like they were burning the Jawa, whatever,
corpses.
Clothing.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
here he is just like, not even thinking about it, blowing up this one, blowing up that one, this Jawa, that Jawa. Absolutely loved it. And one last thing, actually two more things. Your reference to the Sandcrawler thing, that actually reminded me of the SNES game, the Star Wars game, where Luke Skywalker was hopping all the way up the Sandcrawler trying to get to the Jawas and get the droids back. I wouldn't be, to your point there, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, it could have been someone took that whole thing. It wouldn't surprise me if they had a little bit of inspiration from that video game, because it was almost exactly like movement to movement. The Jawas throwing things at him and stuff. It happens in that game. And then, of course, I love the montage at the end of the episode where they're putting, like, they got to put the Razor Crest back together, which, to your point as well, it's, besides the Millennium Falcon, it's become my second favorite ship.
Oh, that's
easily.
great.
So, I love the Razor Crest. But I love the montage of trying to put everything back together again, because it's a montage. So those were always good.
Yeah,
Urza Master.
It felt, again, it felt like being back in Star Wars. I mean, I watching it again. What was really cool is this is like now the second or third time I've watched this show. Watching it again, I kind of thought, am I going to lose any of that magic of feeling like here I am, with the Jawas, like I'm in Super Star Wars, like, am I going to lose that feeling of, seeing this for the first time and feeling that, again, I don't know if it's intense nostalgia, it's probably some of that, but it's also just like immersion. Like you are suspending the world around you for a moment to just feel like you're there in the Star Wars universe. And that's something that, for all the things that Star Trek does well, very rarely do I find myself feeling like I'm watching from the interior of the Enterprise. I don't get that quite as much, and it's probably because they're on the ship. They're not doing these big landscape scenes and giving you this whole world to play around in with your imagination. I really truly felt like I was there in the canyon with the Mandalorian. Like I really truly felt like I was fighting with the Mudhorn a little bit, and some of that is the cinematic visuals. Some of it is just the incredible acting, and some of it honestly is just the fact that this is a show that engages you with all five senses. Like and we'll talk about later episodes of the Mandalorian. You start to feel like, I haven't had a pickled egg in a long time, but that looked kind of delicious, Spoiler alert. But, it is one of those things that I was still unsuspecting the first time. And it still catches me off guard. Every little reveal, every nod to some other obscure Star Wars era or occurrence or Easter egg. And it does. It feels like fan service of the best kind.
Yes.
Where you're getting all of these things that, like Psyllium Maas said, all of these imagination things that, sprung from toys or games or the holiday special. Like, of all things to hearken back to, the holiday special, really? But there's something to it. There's something to building all of that together. It's like assembling the Razor Crest out of Legos, which they do make a Lego set, and I'm like this close to getting it every time I see it. I'm like, it's a lot of money, but it's just this. It's the industrial light and magic of Star Wars that it really touches you as a fan, and it's something that very few things duplicate throughout your life, right? Like I know watching Mighty Morphin Power Rangers growing up, I was right there in Angel Grove, back in the day with the power of friendship and Zordon and Alpha 5 battling putties. When I was 4, 5, 6 years old, that was very real to me. Watching it now, I'm like, wow, this is goofy and fun, and I enjoy it, but it's pretty cheese. Star Wars and The Mandalorian especially, like, I do not feel that one iota. Like, I am just as enamored with what's happening on screen as I was the first time I watched A New Hope. Yeah. But the big reveal. Psyllium Maas, why don't you take this away? Because we always get to change up who's going to talk about the big thing. I want to hear your take on the big reveal the first time.
For the child we're speaking of, correct?
Yes.
This is the one thing that I thought, because again, I spent the first season just making googly eyes at his googly eyes, and just every little baby like gurgle, and every just little cute moment with the ears, and he was the most adorable thing I'd ever seen, and just like Werner Herzog apparently fell in love with it on the set. So I have to admit, like my judgment was a bit clouded. And Favreau insisted, like this big surprise, again, inspired in no small part by Donald Glover's offhand comment while they were filming The Lion King and had nothing to do with Star Wars in the moment, was just, he said, I genuinely felt like with television, and this is to Jedi Master Lord Uther's point, like you want the water cooler moment, you want that discussion. And Twin Peaks was one of the shows that we grew up with that had that, for those of us who were watching Twin Peaks. And so the idea was, let's not tell anybody what the direction of the show is going to be. Let's not tell them that we're going to have this lone wolf and cub sort of inspired journey. And Disney, when you're somebody who excels at merchandising, at marketing, and so forth like that, you want to get those things on T-shirts and have sippy cups and have decals and they eventually were able to do that, but they lost that critical 4 or 5 months build up to the show. Like they didn't release anything or have anything ready to go by the time the first season began airing. And it wasn't until that period between seasons 1 and seasons 2 that suddenly everywhere you turned, it was the child this and the child that and so forth. And again, this show premiered in November, so you were right around Christmas and the holiday season, the shopping season. So it could have been a very lucrative bet for Disney to like roll it out. But like you said, if that image had leaked, if the set photos with the puppet had somehow gotten out and people knew about it in advance, then I think some of that magic and mystery, some people might have said, oh, they have a thing that looks like a baby Yoda. I'm not watching that. Well, where's my bounty hunter show? So I'm so glad that somehow we were all, I think, gobsmacked and surprised when it was revealed. And if you're really paying attention, we were kind of spoiled in a good or bad way, you decide, when we did the prequels, because we spent much of our time in the company of Jedi, of Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. And so in the prequels, the prevailing atmosphere is the Force. Everyone talks about the Force. Everybody knows about the Force. Everybody knows about the Jedi Knights and their order and what they stand for. And it's true. After the events of Revenge of the Sith, the Jedi are erased from the history books, hunted down and destroyed by the Inquisitors and Lord Vader and so forth. And when Luke is training with Obi-Wan, it is dismissed by Han Solo as just an ancient religion, and nothing. I may have heard about it once, when I was drinking at the Mos Eisley Cantina, but it has no real impact on his life or the fate of the current universe. And this show preserves that in Episode 2. The child saves the Mandalorian's life by raising the Mudhorn at great personal physical exertion, and neither he nor Queely the Ugnaught can even wrap their heads around what that is. They're like, I don't understand, explain it to me again. What happened? And he's like, I don't know. Like, there's no vocabulary for the Force in this universe that has trickled down to the masses. They don't, it's like Andor, it never even comes up in discussion, to then suddenly be witness to it, to a Force wielder, a Force user. It's like they can't even, he can't even put into words, it's not like, oh, he must be a Jedi, or, oh, of course, he's using the Force. There's nothing in his experience that can give him the words or the ability to describe it. And, that's fascinating, right? But that's basically what the universe is set up. Since Revenge of the Sith, we talk about the Jedi as like, oh, these mythic warriors. But some people, they just disregard the myths. They had no time for it. They were too busy making their way through the universe. Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. And so I loved that when he finally used it, we get it. We hear the Force theme from John Williams being played. We know what he's doing, but they're absolutely bewildered, to the point where it's like, is it magic? Like what? So I love that perspective, and I hope as we develop further and they learn more about the energy field that binds us and penetrates us and binds the galaxy together, I'm looking forward to those reveals as well. But that was just, to me, just because, like I said, we are just jaded Star Wars fans who are like, oh, the Force, of course, you can move silverware across the table with it. But But this was good.
Yep. I also like how we see the bond forming after that happens, right? Like Mando actually kind of looks, and again, we can't see a facial expression. All we see is a mask kind of turn and look at the child as the child's wiped out from trying to do that. But we know there's emotion there, and we also, and which I think is incredible. And we've also been exposed to Mando hating droids. Like there's a reason for that, right? So we've like when he was knocked out, we're seeing a little bit of that too, which is going to come into play probably down the line at some point. But again, we're getting a lot of, like we've talked about, right? Like a lot of this mythos is really being set up, and like we talked about with Ahsoka, that's what draws us into it, right? Is seeing that all coming together. So those were a couple other things that kind of stuck out to me as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said about this post-Empire life where, the Jedi have been eliminated, and largely most people don't know about them anymore. Because, after all, making your way in the galaxy today takes everything you got.
Yes.
But sometimes you want to go where every Mando may know your name. And hopefully they don't know your name from a puck. That is our recap of the first and second episode of The Mandalorian. It is our custom here on The Graying Jedi to bestow upon these episodes a lightsaber color rating. So, gentlemen, I ask of you, what lightsaber do you dub these episodes?
Mine is green, as you can see behind me. I even set it up for that.
Moonlighting.
So definitely, these are two green lightsabers. Whether watching it for a second time, or actually maybe it's the third time around, but I also remember the first time around, like, my family and I were planning our nights, like, we're going to watch this show. And I think that was the other thing that Disney kind of does right, is it was forcing us to sit down together, and we can't wait to see the next episode. So that's another reason why it gets a couple of green, gets the green lightsabers from me, is those pieces of it as well.
I'm not sure if this needs any explanation, but for those of you who are listening to us on Spotify and so forth and can't see the visual at this point, we will go green U.S. postage stamps of one old Jedi Master, Yoda, 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 which I received as a gift on Life Day. Nothing more needs to be said about it. It made you feel like you were 7 to 10 years old again, and I hope that there were a lot of 7 to 10-year-olds who got that feeling for the first time when they tune into this.
Absolutely. And I echo the sentiment. I don't think it has to even be belabored. This is solid green lightsabers across the board for me. Again, I felt like I was back as a kid again, watching Star Wars for the first time. It was exhilarating. It was entertaining. I laughed. I was touched emotionally. I was scared a little bit by Werner Herzog. I was really hoping that, like, Klaus Kinski was not going to jump out and choke me. There's a lot of things that were playing into this. And to be frank, like, I will say the one apprehension I had after these two episodes was that, are they going to be able to keep this up? So, for all of you pending rebrand fans out there, if you are wondering the same thing about The Mandalorian, maybe it's your first time watching this series or hearing anybody talk about it because you haven't watched it yet, highly encourage you to click that subscribe button, follow all of our Graying Jedi episodes here, and as a bonus, you also get the fabulous Warp Core podcast, the 8 is Enough podcast, the Cinebits, which will educate you all about the Hollywood experience, and all of our wonderful little bits and shorts that come across our channel, lest we forget that the Graying Jedi continue here again next week with The Mandalorian, leaving you as always with a may the Force be with you.
And also with us.